If consent is something that can be read through body language, why do some sexual encounters require a safe word?
I suppose because some people are into the fantasy of being able to say no but still have things done to them. So a safe word kind of distinguishes what is no and what is not.
Why are there some women who have a grape fantasy?
What's a grape fantasy?
I can't say the R word because it'll get me demonetized.
Oh, I have one of those. I don't know why.
What does it mean to give valid consent?
To give valid consent, it's just all about, having that one-on-one connection and being okay with having sex.
Is consent something that must be verbal or can it be expressed through body language?
I think it needs to be verbal.
I think social cues are hard to read for some more than others, so I think verbal responses should always be clear and cut through.
Does consent need to be enthusiastic or is a passive yes enough?
No, consent doesn't have to have any specific tone. What it said should be what it meant.
No, I think it should definitely have some, feeling behind it.
Why is consent more likely to be assumed to be no rather than yes?
Usually, people when they meet are drinking alcohol, so you assume no instead of yes, because both are intoxicated. I don't know.
If you're already with that person, why wouldn't it be more likely to be assumed to be a yes than a no?
If you've already had sexual relations with someone and you're dating, I would assume that they want to be with you. That's why you're dating.
It's assumed no, which it should be, because just because you're in a relationship, that doesn't mean you own that person's body. You're not obligated to have sex with the other person.
If a woman wakes you with a surprise BJ, is that grape?
I don't know. I've never had that happen to me, but there is a possibility of that not being all right.
Since he's asleep, he hasn't given verbal consent, so is consent typically assumed?
I would think that consent would never be assumed in a perfect world.
Why are men expected to read body language but still required to get verbal consent?
That's a tough one. That is, honestly, I think based on looks, unfortunately, in this world, yeah.
Can you be more specific? What does that mean?
Like, I don't know, I guess if you're attractive, maybe you don't need to ask for consent, or I don't know. I don't know. That one's hard.
So you think more attractive people are more likely to get away with...
Yes, that's what I'm saying, yes.
When it comes to sex, why is our culture able to clearly define when it's over during climax, but can't seem to define when the sexual act begins? Wouldn't that solve the consent issue?
Yeah.
It would, but just like every climax, it's different. So every beginning move and everything, it's always different. So it's hard to necessarily define that.
So how do you legislate that if it's always different?
I don't know.
Does no always mean no?
Yes.
Does yes always mean yes?
No.
How can no always mean no if yes doesn't always mean yes?
Because some people make the choice to say yes when they really want to say no.
Girls specifically, or honestly anybody, can be pressured into saying yes, and it's up to the person who's asking to really ask themselves whether what they're saying is truly what they're feeling.
Does no always mean no?
Yes.
Does yes always mean yes?
No.
How can no always mean no if yes doesn't always mean yes?
Because if you're drinking or intoxicated, it should just be assumed as a no.
If two drunk people meet and have drunk sex, how do you know who took advantage of who if neither one could offer responsible consent?
I think what's done with subconsciousness is not anything to take back or reconsider unless there's proof or evidence that can be used to prove whether consent was attained or not.
I feel like they both took advantage of each other. It's a very sticky situation to talk on that. Because I don't think drunk people can necessarily give consent.
But who's typically blamed in that situation?
The men are the ones that tend to be blamed for it.
Why is that?
I'm not too sure. I think when men are more drunk, they're the ones that are more sexual, maybe.
Why are the consent laws targeting heterosexual men when the same situation in a gay couple wouldn't even be a crime?
What do you mean?
If two lesbian women or two gay men were both drunk and had sex, how would you know who took advantage of who?
I think they both took advantage of each other, really. It's just,
Well, right, but did we
Yeah.
establish that in a heterosexual relationship, the man is more likely to be blamed just for being a man?
yeah, it's hard, yeah. Yeah.
So once again, why are the consent laws targeting heterosexual men when the same situation in a gay couple wouldn't even be a crime?
I think it's because society, we used to live in a very heterosexual men's society. I think that's why nowadays people are pushing the blame more on them, especially.
If women themselves often struggle to understand consent, why are men expected to understand it?
Because I don't think gender has anything to do with it. Like, no means no. It is just a human thing.
How is consent mutual if only one party holds the power to redefine the experience after the fact?
I think that whenever you are intimate with someone, it is a mutual thing. So if someone's not comfortable, you're just not comfortable.
Well, consent is mutual in the agreement, but then when it comes down to brass tacks, there is no written laws about sex, right? Yes, there are written laws about sex, but when it comes to face, it needs to have a clear conversation. I have no fucking idea. I'm going to skip that one.
Would you say the ambiguity in consent laws tend to benefit one gender over the other, especially when men are typically the ones blamed?
Based on the history of the last thousands of years, you would need to ask all the men.
Ask them what?
You know, why do they hold all the power? Why aren't women allowed to have power? I mean, there are some cultures that have empowerment of the women, but, you know, especially here in a male-centered culture, why is it that men hold the power? Because they made the money, because they have to feed the wives and kids, because they have to hunt and gather. They made the laws. Like, why do they get all the power to...
So you would blame patriarchy?
Not so much the patriarchy, because that's been our history for the past, 225 years of this country, right? 250?
Is consent something that can be withdrawn after it's given?
Yes.
Is there a difference between withdrawing consent during and after the act?
That's harder. But I think once you've given something, you can have regret, but you can't really go back to giving consent.
You gave him consent. You can't put that on him. You told that person, not even him, you told that person yes. And then after the fact, you want to go and say, no, I didn't want to do this. I mean, that's kind of just like flipping the script, because if you go tell the police that, they're going to believe the girl, like, and then just automatically going to think it's going to be, you know, the whole other way around. She didn't give consent.
So what's the difference between withdrawing consent after the act versus just regretting sex?
I don't think there's much of a difference. I haven't been in that situation, but I do think once you've given consent and you've gone through the act, it's done, it's and therefore anything felt afterwards is just regret.
You can say yes when you really want to say no, and I guess that's that there, but I don't think you can blame after giving consent.
If a woman can withdraw consent after sex, can a man withdraw consent after a woman is pregnant?
No.
Why not?
Well, you now have a baby in somebody else's body.
Because it takes two to tango, and you know what could have been a possibility, and that's a child.
If a man consents to sex, does that mean he's consenting to potentially becoming a father?
Yes.
If a woman consents to sex, does that mean she's consenting to potentially becoming a mother?
Yes, unless she's on birth control or you use a condom.
So why is the man often blamed for getting a woman pregnant, aka knocking her up, when it actually takes two people?
That's a good question. I think that's maybe not right.
I don't think should be any blurred lines. I think once you've given consent and regret or anything is done afterwards, it's done, it's therefore, and whatever the outcome of it is, it's just one you have to live with, because consent has been clearly stated, and therefore anything after is done.
How does consent work in the animal kingdom?
I don't think consent Well, I don't know. They do like their whatever mating call or,
Don't dogs just hump things without consent?
Yes, yes.
Why do we compare ourselves to animals when it supports our narrative, but conveniently ignore them when it doesn't?
That is a tough one, too. That is a very good point. I don't know. We should probably, I don't know.
We're animals, but I think one thing separates us from like animals from the wild is like our consciousness. We can look and say, oh, is this what I'm doing like wrong or right?
If a man gives you an engagement ring and he calls off the engagement, should you give the ring back?
I think at that point, whatever's given to you is yours, and whatever you want to do with it after is up to you.
So why is it if a man withdraws consent to an engagement, he loses the ring?
Say that one more time, sorry.
So why is it if a man withdraws consent to an engagement, he loses the ring?
Oh, that's a great question. I think just because those are more physical, like it's a ring. If you want it back, you can have it. If you don't, it's mine, whatever the case may be. Whereas an action can't really necessarily be undone. It's done for, and therefore whatever the aftermath is, you just have to deal with.
If you lose $10K in a casino and you're drunk, can you withdraw consent and get your money back?
That would be awesome.
Why is sex the only area where someone can say I was too drunk to consent and retroactively undo the agreement?
Because it's your body and it's something that someone else is consciously doing to you. You go into a casino, you know you're going to get your money taken.
Losing money from a casino and having sexual intercourse that comes with so much that it's not two comparable things.
Should sex be outlawed when people are intoxicated? And if so, why are bars the #1 spot people meet to hook up?
I don't think it should be outlawed. I think that would be way too hard to control. But I just do think that it makes it complicated, and I'm big on harm reduction.
If a girl is super drunk and a sober guy has sex with her, is that grape?
Yes, because she is drunk.
If you had a boyfriend who got super drunk and had sex with a sober girl, was he graped or did he cheat?
Both.
Why?
Because he's drunk, he doesn't give the right to give consent, and having a sexual act with somebody else while being in a relationship is cheating.
He cheated. I think I'm the type of person to say drunk actions are sober feelings, so.
Again, that's complicated. I like to ask deeper questions because I think it's always deeper than just surface level.
How did he cheat if he's a victim?
If he cheated, if he's a victim, again, I think I wouldn't just automatically think he's a victim, personally.
Why do Hollywood movies portray sexual encounters without clear consent and romanticize just going for it?
I don't know. They have consent behind the scenes, but it's not right how they portray it.
If movies repeatedly show men kissing women without asking, does that send the wrong message?
No.
Why not?
I don't know. But you can feel when it's right, I guess.
How are men supposed to learn boundaries when popular media doesn't model them?
That's a very good question. I don't know, and I'm sure it's hard.
I think just from going out in the world, experiencing people and, talking to people, having one-on-one real-life connections instead of looking at the internet, instead of looking at movies and social media.
Can a man come forward years later and say he was violated, just like women do in Me Too cases?
100%, yes.
Absolutely. Anybody who is a victim has the right to reflect on the situation and reflect on their feelings and take their time to heal from that before they go out and say that they are a victim of something. That's 100% the case for both parties.
Why aren't men seen as brave for coming forward, especially when male victims are taken less seriously?
There's definitely been a stigma in America that if a man was sexually assaulted, he comes forward, nobody believes him. Men are supposed to be strong, brave, resilient. Unfortunately, it's not always the case.
Women aren't really the ones that are judging them. It's the men that look at them as being weak because, men, they love having sex. So if a man comes out saying, oh, I got forced to do this, then it's looked different. They're looked differently.
I guess the world just doesn't care about men. They care about men, but in those instances, they don't think about men as much. We're always thinking about these things happening to women. So when it does, people just kind of brush it off.
Why does the Me Too movement rarely address false accusations, male victims, or mutual responsibility?
I think it's because it wants to push a certain agenda and focus more on the women, and yeah.
There's a lot of things that men have formed against us, and I feel like the same way we want to embrace our safe places like restrooms or things like that, we should also embrace Me Too as a place where women can be empowered and to speak out. But I don't necessarily think that should take away from holding women and men accountable.
You know, the false accusation, that really just throws a red herring into everything. It takes away from the actual damage that has been caused by these, aggressors.
Are we reinforcing stereotypes by making Me Too about men harming women rather than abuse and accountability across all genders?
I personally don't believe so, just because women are stripped from many spaces in which they can be vulnerable and speak out. A lot of societal pressures push against us speaking out, and therefore I feel Me Too also gives plenty of women a space to just speak out and share their stories and encourage other women to share their stories. So I don't think it's about taking away from men or not holding women accountable. I just think it gives them a space to do so without being violated against the way society normally does.
I agree. I think it should be all genders and everybody can experience it, not just women.
Why isn't there a national conversation or education initiative about what consent actually means, especially in the post-Me Too era?
I think it's because men aren't as involved women are, so I just think men need to be more involved in that topic, and then I think it will become a worldwide sensation in a sense.